Theodore Earl Dodge's 1890 work, Alexander. Five. Cyrus and Darius, 558 to 485 BC. The great warriors preceding Cyrus are mere traditions. The first to leave lessons for us was the founder of the Persian Empire. The greatest conqueror may not be a great captain. It is what the former does which makes him great. It is how the latter does it which gives him rank. Cyrus began his campaigns by attacking Croesus, and was the first to employ a strategic surprise. At Thymbra, his battle tactics were novel. Croesus vastly outnumbered and outflanked him. Cyrus formed his troops in 5 lines, so marshaled that when Croesus's wings wheeled in on his flanks, he could take these very wings in reverse, and at the same time poured into a gap in Croesus's line and defeated him. He then turned on Babylon and captured it by diverting the water of the Euphrates, a gigantic work, and followed its bed under the walls into the city. Cyrus left the local or civil governments of the peoples he conquered unchanged, in the hands of the old satraps, merely retaining the military control himself, a plan later followed with great success by Alexander. Cyrus conquered Asia as far as Scythia, beyond the Jaxartes, the natural limit to the kingdom. After him, Darius bridged the Bosphorus and Danube, and moved with 700,000 men against the Scythians of Europe. These, by exceptionally able and interesting natural strategy, forced him to retire. Prior to the age of Cyrus, in the 6th century before Christ, there is to be found nothing in the history of war which yields lessons to the soldier of today. Although among the nations of remote antiquity existence was constant interchange of armed invasion, as famine or the lust of plunder induced one or other to prey upon the territory of its neighbor, yet in their wars we see no principle whatever governing military conduct, except the rule of numbers. Neither the Egyptians, Jews, Persians, Babylonians, Assyrians, nor Indians show anything like a defined military standard of campaign or battle. The conduct of war lacked every element of system. Great conquerors there no doubt were. Nimrod, the reputed builder of the Tower of Babel and of Nineveh, or whoever was his prototype, was no doubt justly regarded by the Jews as the exemplification of temporal power, with all its attendant evil. Though we must now admit that both he and his widow, the wonderful Semiramis, were little more than mere names for explaining the traditions of successful wars and the founding of powerful cities, to which condition of nonentity modern research has finally reduced them. Still, both must be held to represent a line of distinguished predecessors, and though Sesostris, a great conquest even to Ethiopia, the Ganges, and Scythia, as related by the Greek historians, may have been the work of a whole dynasty instead of an individual, there remains the skeleton of a long series of able wars. Whether these famous names of prehistoric times were those of real monarchs or not, no doubt in all ages great warriors have existed, and many more have been born to blush unseen. For opportunity is the coefficient of genius. But however mighty the deeds of these and other conquerors may have been, Great captains, in the sense of captains helpful to the military student of our times, cannot be found in tradition. From the legends of the conquest of Ninus, Semiramis, Sesostris, we can gather nothing which lends aid to modern war. This is so partly because victory in those ages leaned to the side not of the heaviest battalions, but of the greatest mob. Partly because history gives us no details of these movements, and tradition is picturesque rather than reliable. It is perhaps indisputable that the actual conquerors whose deeds have been handed down to us under these names were instinct with the same divine afflatus which inspired the conduct of later, and to us, greater captains. No doubt they illustrated all the qualities which go to make up the pattern army leader. But prior to the time of Cyrus, we search in vain for something akin to the military science of today, something which has added to the art of war. The same thing can be said of most historical conquerors. The greatest of these may by no means rank as a great captain. To overrun vast regions, devastate well-peopled countries, reduce to servitude brave tribes, may constitute a great conqueror. But it is the method with which this is done which makes a great captain. A lesser actor in the world's drama may well be a greater captain. Alexander was a type of both, the great conqueror and the great captain. He had transcendent genius. He had fit opportunity to give scope to his genius. He was the greatest of conquerors because he overran and subdued the largest territory and the most peoples. He was a great captain because he did this with a method which teaches us lessons of incalculable value. It is the purpose of this work to narrate the deeds of those great captains who have peculiarly influenced the art of war as we understand it today. However, great men have been as generals, however vulnerable. Again, from the top of the last two sentences. It is the purpose of this work to narrate the deeds of those great captains who have peculiarly influenced the art of war as we understand it today. However great men may have been as generals, however valuable their life's work in the world's economy, unless they have made an essential contribution to the science of war, they find no place within the scope of this and succeeding volumes. Cyrus is not only a historical verity, but we know from the Greek historians what he did, and to a certain extent how he did it. All histories vary, often to a material degree. Nor is this wonderful of the ancients. When we read the conflicting accounts in vogue today relating to the wars of the last 25 years. But from the ancient histories we can generally arrive at something like the truth. No one historian can be relied upon in all things, but by diligent comparison of the statements of all, the study of the topography of the campaigns or battlefields, and the estimate of probability as between conflicting statements and reasonably exact narrative is possible. Military critics of every age are wont to disagree in many things, but their variations are rarely fatal. The same lessons can be learned from any of them. Cyrus, of the family of the Achaemenidae, was the founder of the great Persian Empire between 558 to 529 BC. And the subheading of this page is Cyrus's strategic surprise. Persia had been subject to the Medes and was grievously oppressed. Cyrus deposed Astyages, the Median king, and united Persia and Media under his own scepter. Alarmed for his safety, Croesus, king of Lydia, which then comprised almost all Asia Minor west of the Halys, entered the list against Cyrus and advanced across the Halys into Cappadocia, the most westerly of the Persia-Median provinces, and devastated the rich lands and cities of Pteria. He had as allies the Babylonians and the Egyptians, and even Sparta had promised him support. Croesus was preparing to advance still farther into Persia when Cyrus, by a rapid march, anticipated him and met him on the scene of his devastations. An indecisive, wild, and bloody battle was fought there, and ended only by night, 554 BC, after which Croesus retired to his capital, Sardis, not expecting that Cyrus would undertake a winter campaign. And here the author has included an illustration of the conquest of Cyrus. Here he endeavored to straighten for the succeeding year his bonds with his allies and procure material assistance. Subtitle of this page: Forces at Thymbra. But Cyrus, full of the ardor which brooks not delay, and acting on that oldest and soundest of military principles, to do that which your enemy least expects, gave his adversary no breathing spell. Winter was at hand. Croesus, anticipating no further present activity on the part of Cyrus, had unwisely allowed his army to disperse on reaching Sardis. Taking advantage of this error, Cyrus, by forced and difficult marches, came upon him unawares at Thymbra, on the plains not far from Sardis, and utterly defeated him. This is perhaps the first instance on record of those strategic surprises with which the history of great captains is filled, and of which the campaign of Ulm is so notable an example. The capital Sardis was besieged 14 days and then taken by storm. Lydia was subjected, but with that politic generosity which great soldiers have so often known how to employ, unusual in those days, Cyrus made Croesus his friend and adviser, and profited much by the latter's knowledge and influence. One of the earliest instances of excellent battle tactics has been described by Xenophon. It was at this same battle of Thymbra, in which Cyrus destroyed the Lydian kingdom. Croesus is reputed to have had 420,000 men and 300 chariots. Cyrus 196,000 men, 300 chariots, and 300 war camels. Xenophon states that Cyrus had shown great skill in organizing and in victualling his army. The rival forces met on the plain of Thymbra, not far from Sardis. It has been suggested that Xenophon improved in his description upon the actual maneuvers. But if the relation is not a true account of what Cyrus actually did, it describes what Xenophon actually knew how to do, and is equally interesting from this standpoint. Subtitle of page: Battle of Thymbra. Croesus proposed to utilize his great numerical superiority by extending his line far beyond the flanks of Cyrus, and by wheeling in upon these so as to encompass him on all sides. And here we see a illustration by the author of the Battle of Thymbra, the positioning of the armies. Croesus's army in one long line, some say in two, with the cavalry on the flanks. The depth of the line was 30 men, except in the center, where the Egyptian allies kept their national formation of ploying each 10,000 men into a huge square block of 100 files on 100 men each. The chariots were in front. Cyrus, aware of his opponent's great numerical superiority and expecting this enclosing maneuver, an almost invariable one at that day, drew up his army so as best to meet it. He reduced his files to a depth of 12 men, but arrayed his troops in 5 lines, so as to give the army, with the intervals between the lines, exceptional depth. In his first line were the heavy infantrymen in armor. In the second, the acontists, or dart-throwers. In the third, the archers, who were to shoot over the heads of the other lines. In the fourth line, the infantry d'élite, and in the fifth, the tower-bearing wagons, a species of movable tower filled with armed men. Behind all this was the wagon train, in a huge square within which all the non-combatants were placed. His chariots Cyrus placed 100 in front and 100 along each flank, and at the rearward end of the line of chariots he posted a chosen body of 1,000 foot and 1,000 horse. The camel corps, archers mounted on camels, was with the latter body on the left. Subheading of this page: Victory at Thumbra. Cyrus's idea in forming the line so deep was to oblige Croesus to make a very extensive inward wheel. Backing up. Cyrus's idea in forming the line so deep was to oblige Croesus to make a very extensive inward wheel if he expected to enclose his flanks. Such a wheel must of necessity open gaps in the Lydian line, of which Cyrus hoped to be able to take advantage. The wagon towers made a sort of fortified camp to which he could retire if defeated. Cyrus awaited the onset of Croesus. When the Lydian monarch came within proper distance, his center halted, and his wings began the anticipated turning wheel. As can be well understood, so vast a body could not make this maneuver without losing touch in many places. When the wheel was about completed, the chariots on the flanks of Cyrus's army charged upon the somewhat disordered wings of Croesus in front, while the reserves dashed in on their flanks. In a brief time these wings were entirely broken. Meanwhile, gaps had also been made between the center and the wings of Croesus' army, seeing which Cyrus quickly gathered his best horse and attacked the flanks and rear of Croesus' center. This, too, was soon beaten, though the Egyptians fought so staunchly that Cyrus was compelled to make terms with them by which they entered his service. After the battle of Thumbra, Cyrus left his lieutenants to subjugate the Greek cities on the coast of the Aegean, while he himself undertook the larger task of reducing Parthia, Sogdiana, Bactria, Arachosia, and the neighboring principalities. In this expedition he overran almost as large a territory as did subsequently Alexander the Great. The Sakai gave him the greatest trouble. He then turned upon Babylon, and in a 2 years' siege between 539 and 538 BC, reduced that city and incorporated the Babylonian with the Persian kingdom. It was not properly a siege, scarcely a blockade. The Babylonians were very confident in their strength of their huge walls and derided the besiegers. And of course, the subheading of this page is Capture of Babylon. Cyrus had no battering rams or catapults, nor does he appear to have understood the undermining of walls. He had to confine himself to erecting walls or mounds and towers higher than and commanding these of the city. But by this means alone he was able to accomplish nothing. Finally, by one of those audacious conceptions which caused the great captain to loom up above his fellows, Cyrus, hearing from deserters that the annual 5 days religious festival was about to take place, during which the population would abandon itself to rejoicing and pay less heed to his proceedings, made preparation to divert the water of the Euphrates from its bed. He had shortly before drained the Ganges. The experience so gained led him to the present idea, and the vast horde of Asiatics, which always seeks for crumbs from the table of an army, afforded him the means of executing his plan by widening the canal which Sesostris had dug for carrying the overflow of the river into the Chaldean lake. He increased the vigor of the usual operations to divert the attention of the Babylonians, which he succeeded in doing. And while the population was engaged in revelry, the water of the Euphrates was, in the course of a few hours, so far lowered as to yield a footing to his men under the wall and into the city. The king's son, Belshazzar, left in charge of the capital, while King Nebuchadnezzar took the field, was surprised in his palace, and surrendered, or, according to other authorities, died, sword in hand, surrounded by his ministers and attendants. Cyrus' stratagem had succeeded perfectly. Then, with both natural humanity and that supreme appreciation of policy which has always been the complement of the martial virtue of great soldiers, Cyrus at once arrested the slaughter and promised unqualified amnesty to all who should surrender. Subheading on this page, Cyrus and the Massagetæ. In all his conquest, Cyrus was wont to leave the civil government in the hands of the ancient officials of each people, under his own supreme control, keeping a military hold upon the country by suitable garrisons. He was the first to show a broad conception of the best manner in which the elements of a new empire may firmly be consolidated. Later on, 558 to 529 BC, Cyrus extended his conquest to the Scythians in the territories east of the Caspian Sea. He is said to have thrown a bridge over the Jaxartes and to have built boats surmounted by towers to aid him in driving away the barbarians from the farther bank, and thus enable him to put over his army. According to the legend, the Massagetæ were as frank and loyal as they were independent and warlike. They first tried to dissuade Cyrus from his proposed invasion of their land, but failing in their negotiations, they offered to withdraw from the river 3 days' journey and await Cyrus's approach, or Cyrus might do the like, and they would cross to meet him. Cyrus accepted the first proposition, crossed, marched onward 3 days, and camped, spreading out a vast store of provisions, wines, and Persian luxuries. He then left a rear guard in the camp and simulated retreat. The Massagetæ attacked the camp, routed the few men left there, and fell to enjoying the unwonted good cheer. Hereupon Cyrus returned by a speedy and secret march, fell upon them in the midst of their revelries, and utterly defeated them. The legend may have no value except as indicating the sort of stratagem on a large scale which a general then might be able to practice. It is not very different in principle from some stratagems of modern times. Not long after, it is said, Cyrus fell in battle with these Massagetae, and his army was totally annihilated. Subheading of this page: Darius in Scythia. Darius, son of Hystaspes, the consolidator of the Persian Empire, 521 to 485 BC, was so great a king that his mere military talent had been overshadowed by his statecraft. Among his great deeds of war is an expedition against the European Scythians north of the Danube. He bridged the Bosphorus, or rather the Greek Mandrocles did it for him, brought his fleet up the Danube from the Aegean, and bridged the Danube as well. And here we see an illustration of Darius's campaign by the author against the Scythians. No doubt both these bridges were laid on boats. His army is said to have numbered 700,000 men. He advanced into the steppes between the Danube and the Dniester. In meeting this gigantic invasion, the barbarians showed consummate skill in their defensive scheme. Perhaps no savage nation ever exhibited sounder natural strategy. They were good horsemen and skilled archers, and were brave and warlike. They declined to meet the Persians in open battle, but in lieu thereof kept up a harassing system of partial attacks on the Persian flanks. They made constant threats on the Persian rear and line of retreat. They planned numberless attempts to siege the bridges on the Danube. They destroyed the crops and filled up the springs. The subheading of this page: Scythian strategy. These acts were not done in an irrational manner, but with the greatest forethought. They never so entirely devastated a province as to cause the Persians to turn back, for they desired to lure them on to their ruin. They retired from before Darius through the territory, not of friends, but of lukewarm tribes, so that these, irritated by the burden of war, should be compelled to cast in their lot with the others. They retired in 3 bodies by 3 eccentric lines, thus prevented Darius, who desired to bring them to battle, from overwhelming them at one blow, and by this means led him astray. This policy utterly exhausted the vast host of the Persian king in the course of a few weeks, and compelled its withdrawal. It was fortunate for Darius that the Greeks who were left to guard the bridge decided to remain faithful. Miltiades was among them, and advised its destruction so as to deal a fatal blow to the Persians. His counsel did not prevail. The coup de grace was reserved for him to give at Marathon. So hot was the pursuit of the barbarians, so constantly and effectively did they harass his rear, that Darius was obliged to resort to a ruse, and made a sudden night march to withdraw from their front. The ruse was the leaving of the sick and non-combatants behind with the pack train, while Darius marched away with all his effective troops. The Scythians saw the campfires and heard the braying of the asses, and naturally supposed the Persians still in camp. This was barbarous but typical stratagem of the day. So soon as the Scythians discovered Darius's retreat, they set out by the shortest route for the bridges, purposing to destroy them, or to head off Darius in his attempt to reach them. Darius, ignorant of the way, had retired by the circuitous route of his advance. Subheading of this page, Similarity to 1812 campaign. The Scythians, having, as they supposed, induced the Greeks to destroy the bridge for these custodians, did in fact make up the part nearest the north bank as a matter of safety to themselves, were confident that they could intercept the Persians in their retreat. But happily Darius was able to secure his communications with the bridge, and was fortunate indeed to get his army over the south bank in safety. He had lost 80,000 men in 70 days. This campaign suggests in many features the Russian campaign of Napoleon, though the latter by no means failed for lack of careful preparation. But the method of the Scythians was in its intelligence somewhat similar to that of the Russians, while Darius had failed from lack of study of his problem, and because he believed that numbers alone sufficed in war. He had made no preparations for victual, nor provided a means of forestalling such opposition as the Scythians exhibited. But though Darius failed in this campaign, he subdued Thrace, and extended his empire to the confines of the Indus. His failure leaves him still with a large reputation as a soldier, added to the still greater one as a king. And the author here has made an illustration of Scythian warriors. A contour drawing. Scythian warriors. Or pronounced Scythian warriors.